Good evening, chaps. We are live. How are we doing?
Yeah, good. Evening all.
Hi, guys.
No, so that I messed around and changed the starting bit.
Another bit of spare time today, did you, Jay? I'm guessing not too much normal work got done.
Not a great deal. I might even play with that instead. I tried to do
absolutely
like an 18.
fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm almost
like
disappointed that we've had to. Almost like disappointed we've had to go live. I could have sat and watched that for hours, just the intro alone.
We'll watch it again at the end. I'll put it on again. Anyway, guys. First of all, just how are we? Everyone all right?
Yeah, doing good.
Yeah,
excellent,
good. Thanks.
Excellent. This week we are talking about, and I was showing this, that me and Damo here have been having our little brief history mystery channel for nearly 4 years. We once did a whole group of videos, 1942 to 1952, the Great UFO Flap, and never actually covered this subject properly, because we are going to be talking Roswell, the crash, the UFO thing that really kick-started how much of ufology over the last 30 years. So it took us 4 years, but we finally got there. And first of all, today we're going to be talking about just the witnesses of the crash, because I don't know about you guys, but I don't want to be doing a stream for the next 18 hours because this is quite a big subject. So we're focusing very much on the crash, the ranch, and just what happened on those immediate days after the July 4th crash. So we'll just get stuck straight into it, because Dave knows this subject. I'm suspecting like the back of his hand. So I'm just going to let him talk. Go.
Yeah. Well, obviously, as you've just said, crash, infamous in ufology for a lot of the right reasons, a lot of the wrong reasons. And as you quite rightly said, we'll be here until maybe even longer than 16 hours if we try to cover all aspects of this. So, but fundamentally, you heard about this, the Chinese whisper kind of thing. He said, she said, all that. And we've had so many different cases in ufology where that's been the case. But actually hearing what witnesses say that were actually there, what they say, what they've purported to have experienced, is really the nitty-gritty of what makes the case. And in this case, that is the case. So for anybody who doesn't know, which I suspect it isn't going to be many people, July 1947 was an alleged crash in Roswell, New Mexico. And the United States Air Force got wind of this, and they themselves claimed that they had recovered a flying saucer. They then done a U-turn on this very, very quickly, and it was a weather balloon. Okay, that's the brief synopsis. But there was obviously, when you go into depth, this was discovered by a ranch worker. His name was William Matt Brazile, and he discovered this in early July 1947 on the field at the Foster Ranch in New Mexico. He born in 1899. He died in 1963, and he was a bit of a character by all accounts, but his word was bond. He was known to be, if he said it, he didn't say it lightly, and what he said was absolute. He had no reason for flights of fancy, no reason to lie, and wasn't the kind of person that would do that. Anyway, he was 48 at the time, so it'd be easier for me just to go off my typey notes. He was the foreman of the J.B. Foster Sheep Ranch, which is located 30 miles southeast of a small cattle town of Corona, New Mexico. And he stayed on this ranch in a little shack with no telephone, no electricity, and no running water. Sounds like heaven, that, doesn't it?
It was proper ramshackle, apparently, wasn't it? It was probably like bits of wood stuck together and shit, apparently.
They made an excellent episode of Bonanza, though, I don't think. The nearest neighbour to him was 10 miles away, which to me sounds like heaven, quite frankly. But the nearest neighbour was 10 miles away. And it's been reported loads of times before. He discovered a mass of material strewn over a section of the grazing fields on this ranch. And he thought it was strange and significant enough to report it. Now, this was you got to remember the time period at which this was set, and it's just after the Second World War. Of course, the distrust against the East was starting to rise, and there was still a great deal of patriotic fervor within the citizens of the US,
Mm.
and quite rightly so. So thought it was a duty to do it and was happy to do it. Allegedly happy to do it. So he notified the Chaves County Sheriff, Wilcox, which was, we believe, July the 6th. He went to report it on July the 6th, who in turn then called Roswell Army Airfield about it. But he was also saying that another reason that he reported it was because all the debris was interfering with the operation of the ranch, because there was so much of it, and because of the smell. The smell was very off-putting, and it was stopping the sheep crossing the debris field. So the debris field was just so large. I mean, you'll probably go into it in a little bit of one of the other guys about because we get different reports upon the size of it. But anyway, eventually it would mean that the military would call around. These people will be covered more in depth by some of the other guys later on. But Jesse Marcel and Captain Sheridan Cavett followed Marcel back and had a look at it. Then went back and killed Colonel William Blanchard. He was the commanding officer at Roswell. Then issued a press release, which became really, really famous. What he said he found in the debris field was these are what Brazile himself claimed to have found, what he describes as a collection of tinfoil, tape, sticks, and rubber, which was so limited in size that it could be rolled up in a small bundle.
Mm-hmm.
But then he changed that to it was so much of it that it took up an area that was about 200 yards in diameter. So you could roll it up into a small bundle, and then very soon after that, it took up an area that was 200 yards in diameter.
Mm-hmm.
Which was just before we came live. We were talking about the fact that would be vastly greater than the remains of a balloon from Project Mogul could produce. But we won't go into that. Some of the things that went sort of like unnoticed and sort of like unappreciated by a lot of the reporters at the time were some of his comments, Brazile's his own comments that he made at the time. That he actually said that he had previously found weather balloons on the Foster Ranch that had been released
twice.
from twice before, that had come from Alamogordo, and that he'd found them, and he said he was absolutely sure that it wasn't any kind of weather observation balloon. So he said, not only has he said, look, I found these things before, I know what they look like, I know that it wasn't one of those. He was obviously and understandably massively frustrated. He said it come to the stage where he's saying that, unless it was something like a bomb or something like that, he wouldn't have been silly enough or waste enough time to report something so mundane as a weather balloon, because he knew what a weather balloon was. He certainly wouldn't drive, because it was no mean feat. This was quite a long drive into town to do this.
Maybe it was 10 miles away. How far was town? Was that 30 miles, was it, or something like that? I think
maybe even a little further than that.
Yeah.
And then pretty much, other events we might briefly gloss over later on. But that's about the size of it as far as Brazile's concerned for now. We'll interject with other bits later on, because I think other comments that are relevant will segue back to Mac Brazile anyway, because he's certainly not on the picture as it was. But he did give radio interviews. I'll briefly go over them, then I'll pass it along. He also done a first-person interview with the Roswell Daily Record, and we know our researchers know of 3 other interviews, and the first one was a spur-of-the-moment thing, I believe, by Roswell radio station KGFL Frank Joyce, and this was on July the 6th. And he made it. He would normally call Chaves County police office to see if there was anything going on for leads, for news and stuff like that. And when he did on July the 6th, when it just so happened that at that time, William Mac Brazile was in Sheriff Wilcox's office at that time, telling Wilcox about the strange debris that he was finding in the field. Wilcox put Brazile on the phone, and Joyce interviewed him over the phone. The second interview was conducted at the home of Walt Whitmore, who owns KGFL. Sources sort of lean towards that being on Monday, July the 7th. And it was recorded on a wire recorder, which was practice at that time. it was supposed to be going out, but there's like a bit of a scoop going out over the air as a bit of a scoop, but it was never actually played. And apparently that recording has unfortunately been lost, conveniently enough.
All the best ones are.
Well, yeah, and it was confiscated the day after. On July the 8th, the military, the army confiscated it, and they never returned it during the operation to kill the original disc retrieval story. And remove all the contrary evidence to the disc removal thing. Bearing in mind, of course, that the military's first port of call was to release a press release saying that they recovered a flying saucer, flying disc, And anyway, the third and last interview was conducted by an El Paso radio station. And all we know about it is that it took place. I can only guess that Brazile really repeated the story that he gave the Roswell Daily Record. Now, based on investigation, really, and any kind of reasonable deduction, it seems almost certain that Joyce and Whitmore interviews presented Brazile's story relatively honest and undistorted, at least at that time. So, for the most part, because the furore and everything that came was within a few days after that. It only lasted a few days, bearing in mind, people, and then it disappeared for 31 years. Nothing was heard of it until about 1978. And at some point between July the 7th and July the 8th, Brazile was placed in military custody at the base. And his statement during this time is considered suspect. So the statement that he gave when he was speaking to Whitmore and Joyce is very much different in feel and in substance and everything narrative than the ones that was taken when he was in military custody, which is understandable. And people are saying it's a result of coercion. Okay. But family members of Brazile say that he was frightened or bought off by the military. So even family members of Matt Brazile say that he was frightened into changing his story or bought off by the military, which is understandable. And that the July the 8th Roswell Daily Record interview. Yeah, the July the 8th Daily Record interview was probably the one that was dictated to him by the army. Well, a couple more points, then I'm out of here, as it were. His name surfaced in public on the 9th, July the 9th, in the Roswell Daily Record article. They didn't print a photo of him, but lots of other papers throughout the country did. And remembering that, a lot of the other newspapers around the country got on the back of this because of the Daily Record and the subsequent claims made by the United States Air Force that they recovered a disc, that they recovered a flying saucer, which is why the others got on the back of it because of that. The turnaround, they weren't as quick to get on the back of. So when it came to saying, well, actually, no, it was just this, there was a little bit slower on the upkeep because it's not as newsworthy as saying we've found a flying saucer. So when you say, oh, sorry, we dropped a major clanger, we didn't actually find a flying saucer, it was just a weather balloon, they were a little bit slower to report that,
shock
kind of thing, which you understand. The first picture of him was a wire photo that was electronically transmitted from Roswell. And that appeared in the Albuquerque Journal. And that alerted his son, Bill Jr., to the fact that his dad was the center of, I suppose you call it a controversy, really, wouldn't you? And that he might need some help. But the same paper, the same page of that journal, I beg your pardon, carried the debunking story that come from General Ramey's office at Fort Worth. In itself, that's interesting, which was headlined... General Ramey empties Roswell saucer, and Brazile was also mentioned in name in that article. I think the rest of it I can sort of come back to. I will say this before I throw it back to you, Jamie, when I can find it. He's the only person among the so-called Roswell witnesses that was ever detained by the military.
Which does obviously add much credence to him as one of the, I suppose, the main witnesses.
Well, you say he was the main witness, wasn't he? So,
the main witness, yes.
I think you touched quickly on everything. That there's been different stories, and there's some confusion around the exact account. We talked about the crash potentially happened on the July the 4th, but only we're basing that on Brazile. There was a big thunderstorm, apparently the night before, wasn't there? Brazile, how you even pronounce it. He says he did hear some sort of explosion or something, So he thinks that maybe when the crash happened. I've seen other reports, though, that have said that he actually saw this debris anything up to 3 weeks before, in mid-June. And he saw the bit of debris, didn't think much of it, and sort of ignored it, and then came back. I've seen one account that said that he initially saw the debris when he was with his son, and then they went back with his wife, and he's got a daughter as well. There's two kids.
He has got a daughter, yeah.
But he actually went back with all of them, and they collected some debris on the Saturday, and then they took it on the Sunday. But that's not possible because his family are actually more than 100 miles away. So we actually do know he was with a young boy, a 9-year-old Dee Proctor, which we'll talk about in a minute.
His daughter's called Bessie, by the way. Bessie Schreiber. Bessie Schreiber. Yeah.
My point being, though, there is some confusing evidence because there seems to be different stories being told.
But is that too surprising, given the fact that it's the same sort of circumstances with witnesses to a extraordinary event where men in suits come and what did you see? Well, no, you didn't see that, did you? You know, much like with the, So are we surprised that the information differs in some accounts than others? And because at some point, if you've been lying for a long time, it's hard to remember what the exact truth was and where the lines become blurred sometimes as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we found this thin metal that when you screw it up, it just disappeared back. You mean tinfoil? That's tinfoil.
As I said a second ago, for people to turn around and say that he went out there with his son, I've obviously decided to totally bypass the facts that his son weren't anywhere near him. His son went to him when he read about it in the newspaper.
I do wonder as well about how much, like I said, it was Stanton Freeman that really, he made his name on this. I think you could almost argue, but there's other people that pulled the story out of nothingness. Do you think maybe that nearly 30 years going by between it actually happening and then it becoming, maybe that's also where some of the confusions come from, that stuff has just been misreported and
Chinese whispers
effect, a little bit.
Passing on a story by word of mouth, eventually it becomes distorted, doesn't it, with the number of mouths it passed through? We know that.
All you need to do is,
isn't it, to exaggerate and twist slightly the story. And
as we've discussed, in psychology, it's not unusual for people to remember or have long distant memories that have been that have embellishment upon them because it helps them to remember them. So it's not like what you would call conscious deception by doing it. It's to help memory. It's a way of helping memory, to bring memory to the fore. Is to sort of embellish a little bit. You remember a story sometimes better than you remember memory, but you'll always remember trauma better than you remember memory as well. So
I get that. It's the way the brain accesses and stores memory, isn't it? Basically, it's and the more we understand about that, then we'll be able to tell how reliable people's memories are. But at the moment, we do think that there is a bit of a grey area where people do tend to it's not an exact video recording in their mind of what happened on that day. It'll be what their mind has created from their senses and the memory of the senses from that day.
There's an interesting point here that Em makes about on June 24th, pilot Kenneth Arnold claims to see 9 unidentified flying saucers skipping across the water near Mount Rainier in Washington. One of the critics of this story said, well, had Brazile actually heard this story and he'd heard that there was everyone was talking about it. I always remember
jump in a sec, Jay?
Go on,
because this is relevant to what I think you might say. Actually, there was quite a few things going on exactly around about that time. It wasn't just the Mount Rainier sighting. On the June the 21st, a Navy seaman called Harold Dahl claimed to have seen 6 unidentified flying objects in the sky near Maury Island in Washington State's Puget Sound. And the next morning, he's one of the first people to claim to have been sought out and debriefed by so-called Men in Black. It was 3 days after that Kenneth Arnold saw the UFOs over Mount Rainier in Washington Bay. And it's saying that by the end of 1947 anyway, there was like a global mindset, like a mass hysteria, with more than 300 flying saucer sightings in the last 6 months of 1947 alone. And also in July the 7th, 1947 in Phoenix, Arizona, so obviously within days of it, William Rhodes,
Williams
took
incident.
some photographs, and there's sort of like some ufologists have put forward or conjectured that his sighting could have been a recovery craft looking for their downed comrades. So there you go.
Going on, there was obviously the Washington flap only a couple of years before this. Basically, 1942 to 1952 seems to have been a massive period where lots and lots of UFOs were witnessed, particularly over North America. Literally, about a week before this incident, there was supposedly an incident where somebody was just driving along and 2 UFOs came in so close it actually pushed them off the road. But that was happening very close to this. One of the other critics has actually argued that Brazile didn't know about any of this because he didn't have a radio, he didn't have newspapers on his ranch, he didn't have much contact with it. And they've said that he actually didn't know about any of this, including the Arnold's incident and what have you. Other people have said it's not possibly true because it was quite common for Brazile to go into town on a Saturday, where he would basically go to the post office. But then he'd also quite happy to have a drink. And there were reports in a local newspaper not long after this that he had Brazile had got talking with 4 or 5 different people. They were talking about things like Meteor Canyon and where some meteor had recently been found, and they talked about the Washington flap. They talked about the incident we just talked about as well, and they talked about this Williams incident where 2 UFOs basically pushed a car off the road. Could that have put the idea into Brazile's head?
Was that the 2 ladies in that incident?
I think it was 2 ladies.
It was.
I forget their names, but I think I do know that incident as well. Yeah, it's just, well, I mean, it all ties in, doesn't it, with the invention of radar, World War, the invention of the atomic bomb. If we are being observed by an alien species, their interest would certainly peak, perhaps in that time period between 39, the start of the Second World War, and the end of it, which is 45, and that sort of 42 to 52, that 10-year period kind of coincides with, doesn't it, the end of the war and then the period after. The technology we were creating, nuclear bombs, they're visible from space, so anything observing us would be aware that we developed that technology.
Being extremely noisy.
Radar's also something that's possibly involved in perhaps downing some of these UFOs, supposedly. Apparently that new technology may have messed with their
simply literally old tech messing with their
I'm not sure I buy it. Yeah, exactly, on that reason. Would radar really interfere with their technology for interstellar travel?
Throw dirt in an engine and see how it seizes up. Do you know what I mean? I do wonder if it's like that sort of analogy that that's high tech. They haven't used radar forever, and maybe they've gone well past throwing electromagnetic radiation into space to transmit information. So when they come here and all of a sudden we start throwing all this energy into space, they're like, I could see that could actually work. Like I say,
it's just that sort of increase in technology just coincides as well, doesn't it, with the atomic bomb, with an increase in UFO sightings being reported massively, doesn't it? It starts spiking, doesn't it, as of the sort of the 40s.
Electromagnetic radiation lives in harmony with one another regardless of frequency. So sending out it kind of is, because that's how a radar works, isn't it? When you send out a pulse, you wait for the return, you gauge the size of it, where it is, altitude, the rest of it. Yeah, and if they're working on electromagnetic, I understand that, but I do know that electric waves and magnetic waves travel at 90-degree right angles to one another through space. So do the radar returns. And being as how, for the most part, people are guessing at the operational drive systems of flying saucers, I think it's a bit of a leap of faith to say that a radar is capable of bringing one down without knowing how they fly. No, well, I mean, that's sort of what's alluded to, though, isn't it?
Yeah, what I'm saying is that I can understand the theory. I'm not saying I believe it necessarily.
I think it's plausible. The idea is plausible. I don't think that we have enough information to make a judgment.
No, it's complete guess, and it's complete. It's
I think we need to look into electromagnetic radiation a bit more personally, but okay.
No, I just, like I say, my analogy would be throw dirt in an engine. I just don't see that anything low tech can affect something high tech. I could see that it completely could, because we have no idea what that technology is. So you can't say it can't, as much as I can't say it could, really. To be honest.
No,
Yeah, okay.
I'm saying that it's not about tech. It's actually about natural energy. It's just man's way of containing it and using it as technology, isn't it? Because electro radiation is around us all the time. Electromagnetic radiation is around us all the time. It's just the way that we use it and the way that it is used. That's why we have DC and we have AC.
Yeah.
One's man-made, one's naturally occurring.
Mm.
It's always there. I don't think by us using radar we brought down UFOs or spaceships. I'm just not wearing that. Before we carry on, I just want to say that I'm not wearing that. I'm not wearing it. No.
Hey, I think
I tend to agree.
Maybe.
It's very unlikely in my mind. It's just plausible. But yeah, it's
until we know what technology we're talking about, there's no way of saying either way. Would be my point. It's impossible that we've only got one half of an equation, and we're assuming that all of a sudden, basically somebody's gone. UFOs dropped about the same time we started using radar. And I'm like, well, no, okay, but
you could argue that maybe UFO sightings are reported more from the war onwards because people were perhaps looking up at the skies more. Cities obviously blind out the stars, don't they, with the light they emit? But obviously, when you've got a world war going on, you're quite nervous about being bombed. So I imagine the amount of people looking up probably increased dramatically during that period. So that could account for the increased number of sightings. It's just people being a bit more vigilant. Than they perhaps were previously, rather than it being linked to tech or radar. Although I do think the atomic bomb's definitely a much more likely one, with the that being able to be observed from space with the energy it produces.
Well, we
are being observed.
There's a Bikini Atoll connection in a bit we've got to get to.
Yes.
So right, okay, now so we'll move on from our radar argument. So after Brazile made this report, like he said, to the Wilcox, I think it was, he phoned the local army base. The army base sent 2 soldiers, basically. So Captain Sheridan Kavat, and Major Jesse Marcel, which sounds like a wrestler. It's Jesse the Body Marcel. So these guys turned up pretty much straight away. They got in their cars and they got down there and they were there. He was reporting on the Sunday morning. They were there by the Sunday evening. By the end of that evening, they'd already had a bit of a wander around, walked the perimeter, found a couple of bits of debris, had a lovely dinner of beans and biscuits or something. I've read a report today that it focused more on what they'd eaten that night than it did actually about what they'd seen. And this report was really kept going on and on about how one story said he'd seen this all with his family first time, and they were saying, well, Kavit and Marcel never saw anybody. And this house definitely didn't have kids in it because it was cackle. And he'd been shopping that day apparently, and all he had was beans. That was most of the story. It's like news report.
That one thing alone, he'd been shopping that day and all he had was beans. That just
beans and biscuits,
like a single bloke, doesn't it? That'll do for dinner.
There was also a Master Sergeant Lewis Rickett that was there as well. There were 3 of them, not 2.
Okay.
That's the first time I've heard his name. I've been reading about that for like 3 days. I've not heard that guy's name.
Master Sergeant Lewis Rickett drove the officers there.
Okay. All right.
The report I've read said that they drove themselves there. So this is again another piece of information. That Cavett was in an old Jeep carryall, and Marcel was in a Buick convertible. So that's a bit weird. That's very specifically wrong.
Yeah, another one that's left out of the loop. Yeah, Master Sergeant Lewis Rickett.
Okay.
Oh, it's okay. So what did he drive them there? So he drove them there in a truck or something?
In a Willis Jeep.
Again, that's completely different to what I've seen.
Yeah, in a Willis Jeep he drove them there, as was military practice. There were no staff cars. They weren't driving around in staff cars.
No, it sounds like that. Like I say, the one drove the military vehicle. What I've read, Cavett drove the military vehicle, which is a Jeep carryall, which is a slightly bigger than the Willis.
Yeah.
And they say Jesse Marcel literally drove in his own vehicle, a Buick convertible. That's what he then put the debris in on the back seat of, and that's where he then drove back to his home Monday night and showed his kids.
So I think if anything, I saw like where the crossover is that Marcel made his own way there. Cavett went down with Rickett.
There you go. Then we'll go with that.
That would make sense. That's the only thing I can think, because he was quite vocal about the fact that Lewis Rickett was there, and not only was he there when it went the initial recovery going to the Foster Ranch, but he was also there when it came to. I know that we don't want to segue much too into the bodies and things like that, but he was actually there when it came to being at the hospital as well, and transporting them, as well as chunks of it for flight then to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So Lewis Rickett was involved in several elements of the story, not just when it actually came to going to the Foster Ranch. So just a shout out to Lewis Rickett there, if you're listening, sir. I don't want you to be forgotten about.
He's 140 years old.
That does seem to make the most sense, doesn't it? Yeah, yeah. Okay, all right. He drove, Cavett down in the military vehicle and was accompanied by the superior in his own vehicle.
Makes more sense.
Cavett was his intelligence officers, weren't they?
Yep.
Yes, they were. Yeah.
Was Cavett the junior? He was the junior, wasn't he?
Yes, he was a captain.
Yeah.
Captain. Yeah. Everything I've read doesn't really talk about Cavett a great deal. It generally focuses on Marcel, mainly because I think of what happened afterwards when and obviously Marcel Jr, his son, got involved. Marcel Jr sounds like a clown to me. It sounds like. Do you know what I mean? It sounds like a clown character.
Or a Brazilian football player.
Or a Brazilian football player.
What's the difference?
Yeah, you have seen Brazil before, haven't you? They're not that bad.
What's the difference?
They're all right, yeah. So, Major Jesse Marcel. I'll give you a quick bio of him before we crack on. He had an interest in radios when he was a boy. He was born in Bayou Blue, Indiana. In 1924, he joined the National Guard and did 3 years enlistment. And 1942, he was then commissioned as a second lieutenant into the U.S. Army Air Force, where he quickly joined the intelligence gathering. He was a combat photo interpreter. Almost immediately after becoming qualified, he actually became an instructor. So he was obviously reasonably good at what he was doing. October 1943, he joined the 5th Bomber Command as a squadron intelligence officer. He gained the rank of major in 1945. In 1946, he was at the Bikini Atoll tests as the 509th Composite Group as part of Operation Crossroads. This was a point where there was only 6 nuclear weapons in existence on the planet, and they were testing 2 of them. So, I mean, this was a big deal, a very large, a very important mission. He got a Bronze Star and 2 other awards following that because he was recognized for his importance in the mission. He was then quoted after the July 7th, officially, after seeing the Roswell incident, is we found a few more patches of tinfoil and rubber at the site. That is one of the quotes he's had, and one of the other quotes he's had was very, very different. But after he retired, anyway, he left the army a couple of years after that, after Roswell, only about a year after. He was actually only in the army about 8 years. He became a TV repairman. He left on a compassionate leave to go and look after his mom. He became a TV repairman after his discharge in 1958, and he died in 86, sorry, died in 1986.
In 1986, yeah.
So that is the man in, I think, one of the big critics about this chap, and this chap is, if you don't know his face, he's the chap that is on his knee with the tin foil the day after when they said, no, it wasn't a flying saucer, it was a weather balloon. And he's the one looking at the tin foil going, what the fuck is this? You can see it in his eyes.
Yeah.
Sort of like,
definitely.
This isn't what I gave you. Where's what I gave you? Something.
That's in Raimi's office, though.
Yeah, in Raimi's office.
General Raimi's office, yeah.
So his son, Jesse Marcel Jr., has had a lot more to say about this since. Steve, did you want to throw in at any point there with your
Yeah, just a quick bit on Jesse Jr. So again, he was born in 30th of August 1936. He was 10 years old when his dad came home with the crash debris. debris rather.
Debris.
He was also the first one to spot the I-beam, or the so-called I-beam, with the writing or the hieroglyphics, that was in like a pinky purpley colour. 1961, he graduated from Louisiana University, Medical University, joined the Navy in 1962, spent 9 years in the Navy, retired, then he later joined the Montana Army and became a flight sergeant in 1981. 2004, he was called back for flight sergeant for service in Iraq for 1 year. And then the last sort of 35, 40 years of his life, he dedicated himself to, and his wife, to basically getting the truth and finding the truth of what had happened on the ranch that night. He's done quite a lot of TV shows as well, including things like Unsolved Mysteries, The Road to Rachel, which a documentary film from 2011. And he's also featured in one of the newest documentary videos that come out last year, Roswell UFO Conspiracy Unlocked. And he also went around the world giving lectures on the Roswell incident, TV and radio stations as well. He also had a son named Jesse Marcel III. He's also
I think we all missed that one if we didn't know.
Yeah, keeping it in the family. He also has worked on Ancient Aliens and done some work with Philip Coppens as well, amongst
It's
other
not
people. Yeah, he wrote some books, The Roswell Legacy, The Untold Story of the First Military Officer, and Alien Crash at Roswell. So yeah, but I think he, I think it was, when was it? Back in the 80s, I think he did some work with some military personnel. I think it was trying to recreate what he'd seen on the I-beam with the writing. But that's it. It's
Okay.
It's a tricky one. I know they think they found that the writing could have been like a Roman script, or what the Romans were using back in the day, quite a long time ago. And that's.
So one of the stories said about what they thought the writing was the cellar, because basically the Mogul balloon has like this foil thing that hangs below it. And it's a detector. It's like a big ear, I suppose. You'd probably know this better than I do, Dave, but it's a detector. They're trying to detect the shockwaves or the sounds from the Russians testing nuclear weapons. That's basically what they're trying to do. But it's loads of foil onto like a paper back to stop it from tearing in this like kite-like shape. But then they used a load of sellotape to sort of all stick it together, like thick tape, about 1.5 inches thick or something. And apparently they bought a load of it from like a kid's toy store, and it had like flowers and things on the tape. And that's what they'd done to stick this all this together. So one of the critics I read was that, well, that's what he saw. It was the pretty patterns on the sellotape. It wasn't hieroglyphs. So I'm like, really? That's like trying to say that UFO I saw was a weather balloon. It's, you know, that's just so stupid. It's like how he, for one, Marcel Jr. said that this writing had like a purpley glow to it, almost like it was incandescent. You could only see it really when light was shined on it, and he described it in very specific ways. But what he didn't describe was a bunch of flowers on what is obviously sticky tape. So that made no sense to me at all.
Well, they weren't rather the only time that they were seen, because he was actually seen before then and described before Marcel Jr. ever laid eyes on them, which doesn't seem to make it into the story, I've noticed. And that's by Bill Brazile Jr., Loren, and Proctor. And I did make a note of the way that they actually describe seeing these, because I thought these might come up as, it's not going to shock to anybody that these are going to come up. Excuse me. But they have been described about that. Obviously, Major Marcel and obviously Jesse Marcel Jr. But Mac also told his friends and family about seeing similar markings, and Bill Jr. And Mac's older sister Lorraine Ferguson, and like I said before, Proctor, like describing what was like figures. And at first, when he got told it by his dad, he thought that it meant it resembled like ancient Indian petroglyphs or rock figures that you find common in the southwest. But Ferguson and Proctor recalled it being more like wiggles, and this is where I find it with the way that we've just been talking about it, like with kids sellotape, more like wiggles that you'll find on wrappers of Chinese or Japanese firecrackers, and that there were various pastel colours.
So not sellotape with flowers drawn on.
No, well, it's very. I believe that people can be incompetent, but the level of incompetence, like I believe that politicians, for example, I could believe that they could be incompetent enough to misidentify a weather balloon as a UFO. Trained military personnel, I don't think they're incompetent enough to misidentify.
Definitely.
A crash flying disc as a weather balloon. It depends
Especially
on who you're talking
with it
about
as well.
I don't believe that people generally would misinterpret sellotape with flowers on for a form of writing hieroglyphics. As long as they can read and write in a language, they understand what an alphabet is. And do you know what I mean? I think they understand the difference between hieroglyphics and a picture on some sellotape.
Yeah,
definitely.
But while we talk about it as well, that I mean, it does seem odd to me that Marcel, who is again, he's been in the military a fair few years at this point. He's seen a few bits and bobs. I think M made a comment earlier that he thought it was strange that he would do this, but he threw a load of the material on the back seat of his car, drove back to his house, and woke his kid up to show him. Apparently, I mean, Marcel Jr. says that his dad said, "Come in and show this. You've never seen anything. You'll never see anything like this again."
Yeah.
But what did he actually show him then? A bunch of sticks and some tinfoil? Or did he show him something that was actually really unusual?
Well,
Probably the latter.
His sister was there as well, wasn't she? When
when they saw the material,
and sort of screwed it up and said that you couldn't feel it in your hand at all.
You could crush it down, couldn't you, in your hand?
That's it.
It was like really, really tiny.
And then sort of drop it on the table and it'd spring back open to.
I think that it needs to be said as well that this is the kind of thing that Matt Brazile had actually said in his initial report, and this gets forgotten about, that this is how he described it, which is probably what prompted the military to show an interest in it, outside of the fact that they thought it might have been a Rawin Sond reflector on a Project Mogul weather balloon. Because they describe, if I can find it again, because I was just looking at that, the way that he described it, basically was that he couldn't do anything with it. He couldn't scratch it, he couldn't mark it, he couldn't bend it, and he couldn't whittle it with a knife. So that would lead me to believe that he tried to whittle one of the I-beams or something like that. Must have been light, a bit similar to balsa wood maybe or something, and tried to whittle it away with a knife and couldn't do it.
I think he also tried to burn it with cigarette lighters as well.
Yeah. There's a couple of witnesses who said the same thing. There's Aunt Retta, which was one of the other witnesses' stepmom, said she saw a piece of the material. It was a tan-like brown plastic, about 4 inches long. It was very smooth like plastic, but it looked more like wood, but it was too smooth. They couldn't cut it, they couldn't burn it, and it weighed almost nothing.
Could you say that carbon fiber
material, doesn't it? That's been engineered on an atomic level. That's my.
Could you say that carbon fiber would look like wood, if like back in the day, if that makes sense?
How it was,
if you didn't know what you was looking
together. How long has carbon fiber been used?
Not that long.
Not the 1940s.
No, I think carbon nanotubes they were starting to do in universities in the 90s, weren't they?
Yeah, early 1990s. Yeah.
And then it probably came into like commercial production for certain products, didn't it? Probably by the end of the 90s, like the turn of the 2000s, I imagine, because it's always a bit behind, isn't it? The commercial.
Carbon boron composite rods and such in the late 1980s, but for, like I say, commercial use, so fishing rods were using carbon quite earlier.
I suppose actually, yeah, just because of the flexibility that it gives, which you need for fishing, don't you? Yeah.
A lot of it out of Korea.
Really?
Yeah, 40 ton and 30 ton weave carbon. Yeah. Sorry, I'm not even going to go into how I know that. But
That is going to take the most detailed fact probably of the evening award.
I'm going to leave it there.
I want to ask what rod you use next.
So Marcel Cavett and the other fella whose name didn't come up, and I did my research because I obviously didn't read enough.
Lewis Rickett, yeah.
Go on, thank you. There's been a couple of different variations on what they say they actually saw. The police sheriff sent a couple of deputies up during the day on 2 separate occasions. Only one of the set of deputies actually bumped into Marcel and Cavett. They said they walked the perimeter, like I said, on the first day. Then they spent all day the next day collecting material, even though supposedly that material was only a few sticks and some foil and weighed about 5 pounds, which was one description of what they found. A debris field of about 200 yards. Another description was that they found a burned patch of ground around 200 yards.
Correct.
In diameter.
Yeah.
And a debris field that was over a mile long, 200 to 300 feet wide. There was a gouge in the higher part of the damaged area, or the area, that started in the north end and carried on for 400 or 500 feet. It looks like it had touched something, had touched down, skipped, and that was parts of the debris was. The largest piece of debris, impacted. So the largest piece of the debris was 4 foot long, 3 foot wide, 1 foot thick, and weighed almost nothing. And they said it was literally as light as a feather. I can't imagine anything that's that big that would weigh that little unless it was made out of some sort of foam. Other than that, and then it wouldn't be rigid, if you know what I mean. So, we've got materials now that can be really light and big, but
for the point of devilment, it might be worth mentioning, of course, the alleged second crash site that was discovered on the 5th of July at the Arroyo, just north, where there was more
about 5 miles north.
Yeah, more substantial wreckage found as well as bodies. Although there was allegedly bodies, which we might go into later because of 1 or 2 descriptions about something which accounts for the smell that I was talking about earlier at crash site number 1, should we call it, or the Foster Ranch. But there was also a saucer, quite defined saucer, found by archaeology students that was actually embedded into the face of an arroyo in the valley, just north of the Foster Ranch crash site. Yeah.
Some other archaeology, Dr. Lincoln La Paz said they found a site. This was a fair few years after, but when they searched a much wider area, they found a site a few miles away. They believe it was a touchdown point. So again, they could actually see archaeologically, they could see where the actual indentation was. They found sand that had become glass-like, so you can imagine some sort of intense heat, and burned gravel. There's people around the area that have said for 2 or 3 years after, the witnesses in the Roswell area said that the gouge was visible for 2 or 3 years after, that they believed like soldiers had come in and tried to sort of like cover up the evidence of something hitting the ground, but had not done a very good job.
Well, if it's anything like the you said 200 to 300 feet in diameter, didn't you?
As they did at the second crash site when the military turned up in trucks and jeeps just as the archaeology students were arriving and got shooed away. That gets forgotten about in the story as well. Yeah, they got moved along, by a different set of witnesses that we're not going to talk about tonight.
Not yet.
Takes a lot of earth movement, doesn't it, to hide a gouge that big? And even then, the local people still knew it was there and have seen it before you've managed to move the earth to cover it anyway.
According to some local witnesses, apparently the military randomly turned up in early 1950, and then the gouge disappeared. So they came back 2 years later and did a slightly better clean-up job.
Yeah, apparently they recontoured the actual field because the gouge was still visible, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they filled it in. Seriously, that is allegedly what they done, yeah.
All right,
interesting question. Weather balloons.
Who paid for that? Because that's really interesting, because the government normally won't pay. Yeah, but the government normally won't pay for anything like that. Go and re-level a farmer's field because there's an indentation. That's the farmer's problem.
Anybody would think they'd cut down a forest near 2 air bases based in England as well, wouldn't they? Because of a UFO sighting, but
they wouldn't do such a thing.
Yes, it does smell like they've got something to cover, doesn't it? Cover up, and that they're no expense spared.
Only 35 years later or so, but the same kind of mantra, you know. Let's chop down all these trees.
Exactly.
Let's get rid of all these furs.
Too much
Hide the
evidence.
evidence, hide the radiation.
This is like it's a bit like that incident in America. Was I can't get Kendall out of my head. Kecksburg. I think
the Golden Bell.
The bell. But I think it's probably
Bell,
a Russian satellite, possibly. But they basically shut down the forest for like a year, and then when they left, they sort of went, "Yeah, it was nothing. Don't worry." And they're like, "Whoa! Why'd you shut down an entire forest for a year?" No, it's fine. Go back.
Of course, one of them though. When you look into the Kecksburg incident, I know it's a little bit of a segue, but it's even though at the time when it happened there was probably 10, 20, 30 witnesses. Since it's become famous, every single person has seen it.
Yeah,
you know, exactly. It's one of them. Where were you when Kex? Oh, I was right there, buddy. I saw it all. You know, no, you didn't.
It nearly hit me in the head.
Yeah, so everybody was there. Everybody was there. Nobody saw anything, but everybody was there. You know.
Yeah, exactly. I
feel like the way with these famous events that people always want to say they were there.
Yeah, man.
It's a bit with Roswell. I was watching a few interviews today, and it's like literally like my third cousin's nan was right there. It's like 2 little old ladies being interviewed. I'm like, you don't know anything. Why are you being interviewed? But
well, that's the point. Right? I mean, all joking aside, you've raised a very good point there, because a lot of what we're talking about, a lot of the issues, or rather points within the topic we're discussing, is because of second, third, fourth, and even more hand knowledge of the actual event. You know, it's become from ad verbatim into ad shitem. A lot of it, because there's just so much of it has been added on. I mean, you know, not going into the mortician and the nurse and all the people at the hospital that said this or this, that, and the other. Because there's, as you know, we're trying to stick to the debris field and the initial reports, but it's such a massive subject, and so many people have added their little bit. I mean, when
everybody's got their 2 pence worth, haven't they, Dave? You know,
well,
everybody who lives in Roswell, they've got their
said you've got to
story.
leave. You've got to leave because otherwise, you know, I saw dead bodies. This famous nurse that Glenn Dennis saw. Now, when he was questioned upon it and said, "Okay, well, what was she called?" And a search was done for that. She never existed, you know, because he said, well, the reason you won't find her is she got posted away because they must have known she was talking to me about what happened. So she's disappeared. You know, they've done away with her. You know what the military are like, you know, all that kind of thing. But no record can be found of her.
Yeah, he said he thinks she died from a plane crash from London back to America or something.
They always do, darling.
Right. Indeed, they do.
They always do, yeah.
Yeah. Flight manifests say they're a lovely way to get rid of somebody, aren't they, for insurance purposes?
Yeah, man.
I've got it.
It's on the flip side of those. It's quite hard to believe records when it's the people that say, "Look, this is the proof." I goes, "Yes, but who made those records?" "Oh, we did."
Yeah,
just means it's like. So that you're proving your point with records you wrote. Are you kidding?
Anybody would think there was a narrative, you know.
Yeah, well, we've got no choice but to believe it, and we're also supposed to believe that all government employees are exemplary employees, and none of them are incompetent. Well,
mate, I work.
Events prove the opposite.
Yeah, they're mostly incompetent.
Yeah,
I spent half my day. I had hair when I started working for local government.
No, local government. I've got less. It's more nationalised government. It's because by the time you get it to that, they just want. Yeah, anyway, that's another thing. But bigger governments, and I'm not really a fan, really, because
I think there's an element of money. The bigger something gets, the harder it is to hold on to something, and so it's not necessarily incompetence. It's you think, well, you should have known that, and there's somebody there going, well, that wasn't in my department, so I didn't. But yeah, anyway, completely different story. So, other witnesses in and around, I think. So, yeah, so I've mentioned Aunt Loretta earlier. She was the stepmom of Dee Proctor. Dee Proctor was a 7-year-old lad who was actually with Mac at the time.
Yeah.
We've mentioned bodies a couple of times. She says she actually saw the material. Go on, sorry.
Like I say, possibly the reason for the the story you were saying where they were saying the son of Brazile was out there with him. Yeah, but it wasn't. I think it was. I think that's people misinterpreting the D, D Proctor.
Yeah, D Proctor being there. Yeah,
being there, and that's just again
yeah.
like the story being passed on through word of mouth. Yeah, it's just got distorted to son rather than neighbour's son. Perhaps you've just
I
lost
think there's sometimes right, there's some people have written bits, they've heard bits of the story and just made assumptions. Oh, he's with a 7-year-old lad. It must have been his son. Blah blah blah, and they've just written like it's verbatim, and it's like it's not. Aunt Loretta though, she made the point that she actually believes the crash happened at least a week before it was reported. That Marcel actually went to see his family for the week because he didn't know what to do about it. He didn't trust the government. He'd heard that he might be able to actually get some money. There might actually be a reward if anybody that come forward with evidence of flying saucer or some technology.
Well, that was going around at the time. There was sort of like, named by a lot, not just newspapers, but various other things. Radio stations were offering rewards for proof. Yeah.
Just how aware was he at that time, given how remotely he worked out on that ranch? Don't know. There was a bit of time that elapsed, wasn't there, as well, supposedly, between the finding, between him first finding it and him actually bothering to report it.
This is the bit which comes under conjecture, isn't it, of exactly how long, which is what Jamie tried to say earlier. Because the accounts differ about how long.
3 weeks, a week.
Yeah.
I think. I mean, this Aunt Loretta might have just been being quite. She says about a week, but really do we not exactly know how long that is. We don't necessarily. But apparently he was only knowing what to do about it, so he literally went to see his family to sort of try to decide what to do. He was worried that the government might try and sort of come in, and he didn't trust the government. Basically, he thought they could come in and do whatever, so he wasn't sure whether he should even report it.
There's an interesting reason, because obviously they just taken away a load of local property from people to build the White Sands missile test range.
Yeah, they did.
With the facilities in that area. So that was supposedly what the hesitation, I think, was all about in reporting it, and why there was at least a several-day period, even if not the actual crash going back several weeks prior to the date he supposedly found it and the date that it was reported to the Air Force base. Yeah,
most definitely. She actually says though that most of the town knew about what had happened, that there was this debris up there, and that it was pretty bad. She talked about a bunch of kids, one of them named Sidney Jack Wright, who actually talked about it in 1998, where they'd basically gone up there and had a look around, and they found a secondary crash site where there were bodies. He described them as small bodies with big heads and big eyes. Mac was there too, couldn't get away fast enough, was his quote. I mean, Em's just made a point, why didn't Marcel report bodies? Because he was told very clearly not to.
He did.
He did mention bodies. Oh, I've not read that either. So,
well, this is the thing. You see, people
too big a subject, man. So I tried to do it in bite sizes.
People believe in a certain narrative, but he actually did, and then changed his story. It's one of the things that he did relate to Frank Joyce, the owner of KGFL, was the fact that there were bodies. He commented on the smell. That was one of his main concerns, was the smell and the fact that the sheep wouldn't cross the debris field because of the bodies.
He kept talking about
that. He did report the bodies.
Somebody else said that they one of the reasons they don't believe him was one of his colleagues or one of the other ranch hands that worked there from time to time. I'll find his name. Give me a second. And he argued basically though that if 3 weeks had really gone by before he reported it, then he's just been a bad farmer, because he's apparently not Marcel. It's too many names.
One thing I've Brazile to say while you're finding it is it's not very time sensitive though, is it? If there's some debris from something that's crashed in a field and a rancher finds it, unless it's affecting his ranching of the animals,
which is what he claimed,
which is what he claimed it was.
He claimed it was actually bothering the animals, and Tommy Tier.
Just 1 sec. I just want to jump back to the body thing, because I've got a transcript of the actual conversation.
Go for it.
Now, this is, remember that the military found out of it because it was reported to the sheriff and Frank Joyce. Now, Frank Joyce was, like I said before, he was on the phone to Sheriff Wilcox because he would phone on a daily basis to get any leads about possible news stories. And Brazile was in the office speaking to Sheriff Wilcox at the time. So this is before the military was involved. This is before Jesse Marcel, Cava, any of them, Blanchard, none of them knew anything about it. The military knew nothing about it at this time. Only Wilcox had heard a little bit of the story. And then Frank Joyce phoned. And this is where the bodies first enter it. Right. So he did report the bodies. And this is the conversation between Brazile and Joyce, which was, and bearing in mind, again, a lot of the stuff that we hear is after 1978 because they, Brazile himself died in, was it 73? 63 he died. So well before the story broke, 15 years before people started to hear about the story. So nobody could actually interview Matt Brazile or his wife, apart from these first initial 3 interviews. But anyway, during this conversation, telephone conversation, remember Brazile's in Sheriff Wilcox's office. Brazile says, angrily, allegedly, who's going to clean all that stuff up? That's what I want to know. I need someone out there to clean it up. Joyce said, what stuff? What are you talking about? Brazile then replied, somberly apparently, don't know. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's one of them flying saucer things. So he's one of the first people to mention it could have been a flying saucer too. Joyce replied, oh, really? Then you should call the Army Air Base. They are responsible for everything that flies in the air. They should be able to help you or tell you what it is. Brazile, at this point then, according to Joyce, he started to really lose it, get angry on the phone. Oh, God. Oh, my God. What am I going to do? Joyce said, what's horrible? What are you talking about? And Brazile said, the stench, it's just awful. Joyce said, stench? From what? What are you talking about? Matt Brazile then said, they're dead. So Joyce said, what? Who's dead? And Brazile said, little people. Joyce then said at this point, he thought to himself that he's having a crazy conversation, so he decided to play the role of devil's advocate to get a story that he didn't even believe in at that time, apparently. So Joyce said, what the expletive deletive? Where are they? Where did you find them? And Brazile said, somewhere else. And Joyce says, well, the military is always firing rockets and experimenting with monkeys and things, so maybe. And then Brazile started shouting at him, like, God damn it, they're not monkeys and they're not human. And he then slammed the phone down on Joyce. That was when the interview with Joyce ended. He slammed the phone down. He then said, though, like a day or two later, that he called back at the station to tell that he didn't quite have the story right the first time right. So he invited him over to the station to speak to him. But when he arrived then, the military were with him. And they were waiting outside. So yeah, exactly. He's turned up with the military now and gone, oh, I might have been wrong when I said that on the phone. And Joyce said that both he, and remember that KGFL already had the threats of, we'll close you down if you run with the story. All this, we haven't even gone into all that. But anyway, that Brazile seemed to be under a great deal of stress, loads of stress. And he then told him a completely different story that didn't include anybody's. And that's when he challenged him. Joyce then challenged Brazile about it and made a little green men comment to sort of like kickstart his memory about finding bodies, which, referring back to the original telephone conversation. And all Brazile said was, actually, they weren't green, and then walked out to where the military were. So
you mentioned, I think we said in that the other place. That was basically how Aunt Loretta called it as well. She said that D. Proctor, she showed him where some of the debris was, and then apparently Proctor always refused to talk about it. He until his deathbed, he never spoke about it. It was only then he apparently mentioned once that there was this other place, that it had happened. And that is apparently, it was this other place apparently where the kids saw the bodies. So that's another link. It's almost the same, that there was another site that we haven't mentioned yet, or that we don't know about yet, because it would make sense that if something came in fast, it would have hit the ground, skipped, left debris, and then maybe landed further on, if it was sturdy enough. And that's where the bodies would be. And that's why we would see quite small parts of debris in the initial site. And that might have been the only site that Marcel and Cabot saw. they might not have seen his second sight at all, are they? Until
well, there was another
conjecturing,
witness that described it as seeing body. No, sorry, I'm jumping ahead of myself here. But there is other witnesses. I suppose if we come to any other witnesses later,
I think we're almost at that point now.
Well, I was gonna just jump in and say one thing about that. Linda Proctor. She was obviously the aunt, wasn't she, of Dee Proctor, and she was alive at the time of the incident in 1947, and was actually still alive back in 2011. There was a report I was reading online that someone said that they managed to interview her. They were one of the neighbours. And managed to interview her, and she basically says, just corroborates this whole thing, that there were the two crash sites, that they found bodies at the other site, but wouldn't actually talk about them ever as finding bodies. She just said, and they found like the other thing at the other site, or do you know what I mean? Always stayed away from referring, very vague about what was found at the other site. She's also given an on-screen interview that I've seen, where she openly talks about how the men in black, the men in suits, came and basically told her that she didn't see what she did see, and that they'd kill her if she, didn't play ball. It's very easy to make people disappear in the Nevada desert, or in the desert around here. Not the Nevada desert, sorry, but I mean, that is one of the second neighboring states, but in the desert in that region. So I don't know what else to say, but that just corroborates everything, doesn't it? Really, it's kind of
brilliant.
Yeah.
So other witnesses then. Throw us some names, Dave.
Oh, I've got a couple. Yeah, I'll throw a couple out there. Well, I quite well know one is I'm again, pronunciation. You'll have to forgive me for this. It's Inez. I don't know. Similar to the pronunciation of the Ibanez guitar kind of thing, Inez kind of thing. But anyway, Sheriff Wilcox's wife. And just before she died in 1985, she stated that her husband was informed about the incident by someone who came into town. Obviously, we know that to be Matt Brazile. And then he went out to the site. And he described seeing may as well the actual words. There was a big burned area, and I saw debris. It was in the evening, and there were space beings. Their heads were large, and they wore suits like silk. Mm-hmm. So when Sheriff Wilcox was headed out to the Foster Ranch, he's described seeing bodies there as well, with the usual description that we've all come to know and love when it comes to aliens, as they say in Yorkshire, aliens. And then we've got another witness called Myers-Wani, again, pronunciation, apologies. Who was a pilot and aircrew commander of the 714th Bomb Squadron, 448th Bomb Group, nicknamed the Chief. I bet that's the name he gave himself. We know those kind of people. Call me Ace, one of them kind of things. He told his family about the 1947 Roswell crash, as that's not going to be massively surprising. Told them all about the events in the last year of his life, and again, somebody died in 1981. And he told them that it was all true and that he was involved in it. And he said there were 3 separate crash sites, and the bodies were found and first flown to Texas. But a special interest to them, besides the mention of a third crash site, was the decomposing body parts that had been found at the first crash site. So decomposing body parts found at the first crash site would sort of coincide or sort of like back up the fact that the stench or the smell was putting Mac Brazile off and was, again, the sheep in the debris field. Again, of course, now an interesting fact about Loretta Proctor. For some, might be boring to others, but an interesting fact about Loretta Proctor, and I can't get proctology out of my head when I say her name, so you'll have to beg me pardon, darling.
Not the greatest of surnames, is it?
No, when you're talking about aliens and anal probing,
yeah.
Proctologist,
On that note, Dave, the Aurora incident as well. It was a Proctor family that were involved in the Aurora incident back in the late 1800s, wasn't it, as well? So to have all these families with the name Proctor relating to aliens and the connotations of anal probing by aliens in our world today. You just couldn't write it, could you?
Damo, I'm not known for believing in coincidence, brother. That's all I'm willing to say.
Yeah, it is. It is one of those pure coincidences, but it's just mad.
Loretta Proctor became extremely ill, poor darling, obviously, with she had a life-threatening blood clot in her neck, and she had a fairly. We sort of briefly spoke about D Proctor, massively reclusive guy by all accounts. Felt compelled to drive her to a remote location on the Foster Ranch. This is many years later, by the way. Many years later, where he told Loretta. So again, D being the 7-year-old at the time that people said it was his son. Blah, blah, we spoke about that earlier. And he told Loretta that that's the spot where Brazile had found something else, and that's all they would describe it as. That he had found something else. And this is about 2.5 miles southeast of the debris field, apparently. Now, this incurable thing, or this blood clot that was causing her so much dismay, she recovered from that. But people have questioned why D would risk really the health of his mum, who was really badly sick at the time, to go on such like an uncomfortable and dangerous kind of mooch to the debris field, or what was the debris field at the Foster Ranch. But Loretta would only ever say that it was described as something else. She wouldn't say anything more, and Dee wouldn't talk to anybody about it at all. And another one is Bessie, Bessie Brazile Schreiber. She was interviewed in the 1970s about it, apparently. I couldn't find the actual year, just that she was interviewed in the 1970s. And she described seeing strange equipment and pipes that had been shown to her by, obviously, her dad, William Mac Brazile, as it is, and William Jr. So there's just a couple that saw debris from the actual crash site. Now, this is before the police and the military have had access to this. So all this is when people have seen these bits of it, these bodies and these pieces of debris, this equipment is pre Sheriff Wilcox, pre Cabot, pre Marcel, and pre-Rickett, pre-Blanchard, William Hart, all those people, General Ramey, because the story sort of really took off from then on, really, didn't it? After the debris field, it's when he went into town and the military got hold of the story, because then you've got the military hospital, you've got Glenn Dennis, the mortician, you've got the fireman, there's so many other people then that claim to be witnesses.
If you take like the two periods, like sort of maybe between the event and the military being involved, and then the military being involved and afterwards, you find consistency in the original stories between the Proctor witnesses and the between the two families, from the two ranches, the neighbours, the Proctors, and obviously them themselves, and then you find much more disparity once the military have got involved from all the other witnesses.
The military, once it got back to command of the military, I mean, the military at first went, it's a flying saucer.
Well, again, with what we saying that before that, when he was speaking to Frank Joyce of KGFL, that's one of the descriptions that Brazile himself gave about it. That he said it could have been one of those flying saucer things. Another thing is that he actually told family and friends that this is really early on as well, that he thought that the debris had come from an aerial explosion and not from a crash because it was spread over such a wide area. And that gets lost. Not a lot of people talk about the fact that Matt Brazile said, I could tell it was from an airborne explosion because it was spread over such a wide area.
I thought Jesse Marcel said that.
Don't we? From recent events, or perhaps not that recent now, but maybe 20 years ago, 12-mile long debris field for something that was crashed or shot down.
The thing is, though, with this, if it was Mogul, the whole idea of it being sticks and tin foil and stuff, which you read a lot in some of the reports, not others. Then others ones are I-beams and words like that are used in metal and plastic. We're not talking about a massive thing. I mean, the balloons are pretty big, but that's fabric. The actual deflectors and reflectors things, they're not that huge. They're not, they're not massive pieces of material. But how would you even? What I think is, if you think about the area, it's almost like desert. Almost, it's very loose. There's little bushes, very arid. You imagine if it had been there any length of time, it would be spread over quite a large area just by wind. If it's just foil and bits and things like this. My point being, how did such a relatively small object, if it was just one air balloon, spread over such a large area? And if it did, then how did Proctor even particularly notice it? It would have just looked like bits of litter, wouldn't it?
Well, when they first started Project Mogul, the first types of balloons that were used were large groups of actual rubber balloons that would look like bunches of grapes.
Yeah.
That were
I've
actually
seen those, actually. It's
quite-
not like the white, lighter ones
Yeah.
they used later, is it? No, you were right. It was. It was
so
much
they're
more.
quite heavy, actually quite heavy. Then it was because it only ran for a couple of years, Project Mogul, from 1947 to 1949, and they then changed from the giant rubber balloons to polyethylene balloons, which was the silver elongated ones that most people are
They
probably used to
expand
seeing.
as they go
Yeah.
higher, and
Yeah.
So I suppose that would have been the silvery one we'd be talking about, wouldn't it? But then the way I read it was that a lot of the foil was like backed with the paper with the sticks and things. That sounded like that was supposedly off the deflectors, reflectors. But I suppose the large parts supposedly have been the balloon, I suppose. Okay, that would have been far more if it had been shredded somehow, or.
Which I find interesting. Sorry, Damo, brother.
That's all right. Okay.
That's what I find interesting is if it's one of these giant elongated condom typey polyethylene doodads, that it's how's it become so destroyed into lots of little pieces just by coming down? If it's notoriously light, 5 pounds, just do the science. At what velocity is it hitting the floor to destroy itself, to spread itself over 200 yards or a mile long? If it's a weather balloon, I mean, you don't.
The velocity it's not capable of achieving.
You know,
because of air
it's like,
resistance.
And if it's in 1947, mid 1947, they are supposed to still have been using the large grape type rubber balloons. Didn't move on to that until late 1947 because the project stopped in 1949. So again, that doesn't make any sense.
Doesn't make sense either, does it? And if it was just a balloon that came down, how do we explain the burned area that was described by more than one person?
Yeah.
Including Marcel, who was a trained Army intelligence officer. He was trained in identifying aerial photography and things like that, which you assume he'd have a knowledge of how to spot things like that in the terrain.
This is what I like about this particular subject is, an intelligence officer for the bomb group that's responsible for being the only military arm in the world at that time that had nuclear capability was a complete idiot and could, he practically got his finger on the button but couldn't recognize a balloon.
Yeah.
That's the thing, isn't it? That he couldn't identify a basic thing like that. Again, this is a man who won several awards, including the Bronze Star during his operations with nuclear weapons. He's not an idiot. I mean, because that's again a lot of the critics have basically had to say. Well, that's why Marcel Jr. had to say why he wrote the book first time, because he was just trying to clear his dad's name, because all these people were basically calling his dad an idiot, and his dad didn't know anything. And I was like, I'm so sorry, my dad. Well, he might not have, don't get me wrong, not perfect, capable of making mistakes, but could identify a freaking balloon.
Was surely Jesse Marcel was involved? If he was involved, with the 5th bomb squadron, the nuclear bomb squadron. Yeah, surely he was involved in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Then the actual bombs they dropped.
I don't think he was directly. It was mostly the 509th after when they were testing at Bikini Atoll.
Right, so he's only involved in the testing of Bikini Atoll, but wasn't involved in that. Okay, I wasn't sure. I just thought it might have linked to him. Okay, I hadn't read about that. I was just curious.
I'll tell you where he was if I find it. But I was interested in the fact that he was at Bikini Atoll. The amount of UFO sightings have been Bikini Atoll over the years. I say, coincidence? I don't know, but
Coinky dinky.
He was with 5th Bomber Command during the actual conflict. It was only in 1946 he got into Bikini Atoll. Okay, so that's the bulk of the story.
Yeah.
We have to get into opinion, I suppose. So talk about what we actually think.
I do want to say sorry about this. I just want to throw something in that I've just seen. I think it was John Glenn, but I'm not totally sure. It was either Chuck Yeager or John Glenn. Just in response to something that I've just seen in the side chat there about the bodies. One of the explanations about the bodies was not just the polyanthropomorphic test dummies that were being conducted by testing parachutes by dropping them out of high altitude balloons. was that they were actually doing a test on parachutes with a live test pilot at the time. Now, I can't remember, like I said, whether it was John Glenn or Chuck Yeager. I think Chuck Yeager was it might not have been Chuck Yeager, I forget the name now, and I'm sorry for that. But that when he landed the gondola of this particular balloon, the big basket that it was underneath, it crashed because it was a failed test, had actually come down and crushed his head, squashed his head, and given a frontal lobe hematoma injury, which is why he was at the hospital. Now, this had also given him 2 huge black eyes. So he's got 2 big black eyes, and he's got a massively swollen head, just the upper part of his head. The bottom part of his head was normal size. So this has given him the appearance of like an almond-shaped head and big, huge black eyes. And he had to go to the hospital, obviously. Who wouldn't? You've just been crushed by a balloon. But when he's been seen walking around the hospital, this is when people who've claimed to have seen a living EBE at the hospital, they've actually misinterpreted this test pilot who's walking around with a big swollen bonce and black eyes and thought he was an alien. And that's the United States. Was it called Case Closed? That report they done in the 90s. They released a book on it. It's absolutely brilliant if you want to read it. But yeah, they're saying it's a test pilot. He got his head crushed by the gondola of a balloon. Yeah, all right then. Yeah.
Okay. I've not seen anybody injured that badly that was just sort of like, and he was walking around the hospital, was he? Walking. People saw him and thought he was an alien. He was badly injured.
Absolutely correct. Yeah.
He was walking. Okay.
Yeah, but even if I don't know, I don't know, like to have he'd still have the same coloured skin. He'd still have hair. He'd still. Do you know what I mean? Like there wouldn't be the kind of differences that.
Well, Damien, you say that, my brother. You say that. However, he had ein head ensconced with bandages, one would assume, and also very
bandages.
pale. Yeah, there you go, grey bandages, very, very pale complexion. He's just had a trauma. He's been crushed by a balloon, Damo. Very, very pale.
And people are thick. So I don't believe anything. His arms had been stretched out from when he was trying to carry the thing. So his arms
he'd lost a couple of fingers as well.
Lost a couple of fingers, yeah. But
I shot them in the door on the way into the hospital, and that's have them amputated. Yeah.
I used to box back in the day, and I remember I got punched in the nose. So I got 2 big black eyes, and people were always jumping at me, screaming "alien" and trying to hit me with a stick and stuff.
It used to happen with me when I was younger, but it wasn't boxing. It was when I was talking instead of listening. That's when I used to end up with black eyes. I'm from a different generation, you know.
I was explaining things to people in my own way. And I got a black eye. You're a big fella. Whoever gave you black eyes is brave.
Yeah, I didn't get to him. I was just being silly. You know how it is.
Just got to make a point then about something you made then before we went off topic.
There was other weird things about the family. Sorry, Damo, but it's not like buzz off talking over the top of you for some reason. I apologise for that. There was other things about the family that are just like weird, you know, like missing people, members of the family, because he had his youngest child was called Vernon, who was 7 years old at the time of it. It was a communication breakdown regarding him and Dee Proctor, maybe, don't know, but both the same age. I think Dee was 7, was he not? And
he was 7,
yeah. Vernon 7 at the same time. But unfortunately, he disappeared of mysterious circumstances in 1960 and has never been heard of again.
Missing 411.
Although 13 years had elapsed in that point, and if he was 7, he was then 20. He could have just emigrated or gone and. It doesn't necessarily, disappearing when you're 20 years old, you could just make a different life choice and you've not been on the radar in that part of the world for a very long time.
However, get this. He had another son, the dirty beggar. He had another son called Paul, who died in 1997, who was employed at running a ranch in Texas for the same guy, Mr. James B. Foster, that employed his dad in 1947. But when he was interviewed about it, he refused to say anything.
Dun, dun, dun.
To be honest, some people just want an easy life, though, don't they? And they know if they don't say anything, even if they have got stories that they could tell, they get an easy life. And for some people, that easy life means more than publicising the story about their incredible event that happened to their dad, or there's someone in the previous generation, and it's just not worth it to them. So I do get that from some people. I could understand why you wouldn't want to talk about it all the time and make it your life.
What about the fact that they say there's rumours that the Foster Ranch wasn't the only place, or the events of that time weren't the only, events of something coming down in New Mexico. And that explains the rapid so-called response of the military into going to the Foster Ranch and the Arroyo north of the Foster Ranch, as well as this is a flying saucer. The way that they jumped into it, and it's only when the higher level or the higher echelon, they're the people that wear all the braid and don't actually go out and do anything. But when they made the decision, it's like, we need to keep stum on this one because it's fairly tasty. Whether there's anything behind that or not, I don't know. But saying that there were more than one. Not only was there more than one crash site, like 6, because Steve, you said before we came on air that there was anything up to 6 that were described.
Yeah, I was watching some on the History Channel earlier today, and I can't remember the officer's name. I was trying to look for it earlier during the stream, but I can't find it. And he had some debris that he found at one of his different.
Every time he says debris, it makes me want to laugh. Debris.
It's fine. It's fine.
And French, isn't it? I believe is origin the word debris. I'm not sure. I've got to assume.
Hey, come on! This is where we embrace the French pronunciology, and we call it.
It might not be. I might be talking absolute twaddle there when I said it French, but it does sound like it when you have a silent S. Yeah.
Yes, it does.
Debris.
I was timing cannot. And
yes, so he and his wife went and gathered some of this debris, and I said it right, and they found quite a lot of it. The biggest chunk, it actually looks like a car air filter, essentially. It's been squashed and sort of loads and loads of holes in these metal fragments and stuff like that. And he actually goes on to say that there was up to 7 different UFOs that had crashed within. I think he said the week leading up to the actual Roswell incident, and it's him, I think, that also goes on to say that it could have been possibly the radar that brought these UFOs down.
Bloody radar! Told you.
Yeah, somebody else who doesn't understand physics. Yeah,
yeah. But I can't remember his bloody name. He's a weird-looking fella, and it.
Giorgio Sakalis.
Oh, no. Why is it creationists always look so unevolved? But anyway.
Oh dear.
Sorry, just thought I'd have to.
Brilliant.
So the investigation history channel, he took some of this for.
Right, Steve.
I think he might have some internet issues.
I'm sure it's a fascinating point.
Fascinating. That's the most sense you've made, Steve.
Am I back?
Are you back?
You are now, yeah.
Not really.
Sorry. So the commentary.
Unbelievable.
Set it off to be analysed.
Oh no. Oh, never mind.
What we should do is we should just nod all the way through it as if we know what he's saying. He'll have no idea.
There we go. I knew
he's cottoned on.
Right,
fascinating.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was what you were saying. It was fascinating. It better be fascinating.
No,
so that's it basically, and
we didn't hear anything.
We didn't get any of it. We didn't hear it at all.
We know nothing that you've said.
Oh no way! Oh bloody hell! Sorry, guys. Right.
So that was it, really.
You couldn't have come back any better than that, and that's it, really. After it just been like distorted down from me for about a minute. Oh, it was brilliant.
And that might be the most interesting thing I've ever read. Thank you.
Oh yeah. So go on, Steve. In the beginning, God.
In the beginning, yeah. Adam and Eve. No, so mummy. No, I'm joking. So this officer, I don't remember his name.
I'm sure he don't remember yours either, so don't feel bad about
that. On history documentary today, and he and his wife basically found out that there was 7 different UFO crash sites a week before. And he went with his wife to one of these crash sites, and they found some debris. I think it was 2002, possibly 2004ish that time. So they took the debris back home, and that was analysed by the people that were doing the history documentary, and it came back as being just normal metal, nothing alien or foreign about it whatsoever. But he is the one that suggested that obviously the week before there were sort of 7 downed UFOs, and he believes it could have possibly have something to do with the radars that they was using for the Mogul project at the time, because there were three different areas where these radars were set up, and the crashes or supposed crashes happened within that sort of triangular area of where the radar dishes were.
Which you find interesting, because Project Mogul was about actually sending up microphones at high altitude because of the air, because of the actual atmosphere, to be able to pick up sound waves over longer distance of Soviet nuclear tests.
Shockwaves, wasn't it?
Yeah. And also on that, it's the last episode that I was watching where he goes on to say that. And also they had some radar, and is it LiDAR? Not LiDAR, ground penetrating
LiDAR.
LiDAR, that's it. Yeah. On the area where the UFO hit the contour of the Earth and then jumped off and sort of landed, was further down the road where the crash sites were. And apparently there is an anomaly underneath the ground that's stopping some, I can't think what it is, like radioactive energy.
Is there something to do with the composition of the ground in the area that affects the
the returns?
I'm back. Yeah.
On the History Channel with these things, so there's always an anomaly. Whenever we like that, we're going to
electromagnetic anomaly. But to be honest,
that is true.
That is very true.
Yeah, it is.
And in the next episode, they talked about sharks, because all the History Channel ever talks about is aliens, sharks, and Nazis.
Pretty true, that really. That is pretty true, really.
Alien, shark, Nazis. Right. You just see the H2 channels go, fucking hell, and explode with excitement. Alien, shark, Nazis.
I think it's also worth mentioning, of course, that despite all that we've sort of like spoke about, that Mac Brazile did come into some money very shortly after his revelations that were made about the crash, to the extent where he didn't have to be a rancher anymore. He wasn't staying in a shack, everybody, where he didn't have a toilet. He wasn't wiping his bum on nettles. He no longer was without running water or electricity or anything like that. He gave in that wonderful lifestyle off the back of his reports and bought shares in a meat packing plant. And he also had a brand new truck. He was driving around Roswell in a brand new truck. Yeah, so I think that's worth mentioning. Some people, however, some of his friends and defendants of Mac Brazile have said that he was actually talking about getting a new truck before. So, but he was also talking about the fact that he knew he could make money from finding evidence of a UFO before as well.
His son was saying that's one of the reasons why he went to Roswell that day. It
Yeah.
was either to sell wool or buy a new Jeep. And they were like, this is Roswell in the late 40s. Nothing was open on a Sunday. Who was he going to buy a Jeep off or sell wool to? So that was a bit odd. But that's what Russell's son suggested. That's why he was actually going on the Sunday.
No, more likely he's found out, hasn't he, about what's happened, and he's curious to go and ask his. He wants to know. So I've read this in the paper. What happened? Like, he wants it from the horses, as you would. If you saw in the paper that there was supposedly like a UFO that had been found in your back garden, or do you know what I mean? Not your back garden, your parents' back garden. You'd want to go and see your parents relatively quickly, wouldn't you? You want to ask them what happened. You want to ask them all about it, you know. Especially if it involves new technologies or new materials that we are yet to comprehend, or alien bodies. You'd be there within, you'd be on your way within 5 minutes.
Especially if you're going to get a new truck.
Well, I think somebody in Army Intelligence basically went, that's a really interesting story, Mr. Brazile. I've got 2 doors for you now. Now, one door has your instant death. The other door has a brand new truck.
Yeah, which one are you going for?
Would you like to take? And that's basically what happened. He goes, I'll take door number 2, please, sir.
Basically, what we're talking about is a red and blue pill situation, everybody. But with the door, really.
I was just thinking that exact same thing. Yeah. A good analogy. I was thinking the red and blue pill. I was going to say it next.
Yeah. Just with the door, you know.
Yeah. There's your truth, and there's my truth. Which truth do you want?
My truth comes with a lot of money. Your truth comes with a life of hardship and a life of being hunted by the intelligence agencies of America.
Yeah,
I would say my truth comes with a new truck and a nice lifestyle. This truck comes with no life.
No life.
You know your kids. Well,
no life for them either. So which do you pick? Yeah. Oh, I think I'll. Ignorance is bliss. Bring the blue pill this way.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we got to get into opinion.
Okay.
Got 20 minutes left to get into the opinion. So obviously the whole Roswell story as a whole, we're just going on with the crash. So I'm supposed to ask a question first. Do you think an alien spacecraft crashed at Roswell? That's the big question, isn't it? Did an alien spacecraft crash at Roswell in 1947? Damo, you can start because I can see it in Dave's eyes.
Yeah, he didn't want to start. Yeah, I don't mind starting. Yeah, I mean,
I can see it in his eyes that when he gets started, we'll still be here in 45 minutes.
Right. Okay. Yes.
I've had a bad
I will go first.
Anything can happen.
Yes, in my mind, I think it's the most likely of the outcomes that a craft did crash land in that location at that time. The witnesses, the Braziles and the Proctors and their descendants. It's become a major part of all of the lives of all of the family members of those families. It's only once the military really seems to get involved that obviously then they first publicise that they found something incredible before perhaps later being reined in by the powers above and saying, nope, you're going to have to retract that and say you didn't find that. I think that may be linked into perhaps the war having ended and not needing to be perhaps as secretive as they perhaps were, and that's why they probably originally leaked it. And then later the powers above probably then forced the retraction of it because of the I suppose the state of play with Russia and how that was going to pan out with the Cold War over the next 40-50 years. I think it's it just I don't know. Yeah, I see it far more. I'm so I don't know 95% that it was probably an alien spacecraft that landed, and it was one of the early ones, and they didn't really know how to respond to it perhaps at that time. The Brookings Institute report came out in the early 50s. That then decided that if they did find any evidence of aliens or artifacts from this planet or other planets that we explore, that they would hide it from us anyway. So I think it was that sort of timing sort of set into motion what would happen with the later discoveries. I think was it the Majestic 12 was also sort of formed on the back of
Project Grudge and Project Sign.
Project Sign as well. So it just seems like it was the original response from the military from Jesse Marcel was legitimate, and then it was forced retraction, which he then went back on his deathbed and said, "No, what I originally said was correct." I just don't see how. No, for me, it's it is a crashed, recovered alien vehicle.
Steve, what do you think, mate?
Yeah. Again, I've got to agree with Dame. 95% sure that it has to be a crashed UFO. I mean, Jesse Marcel obviously worked with the like mobile balloons and things like that, and seen them before and things, and obviously he knows what he's looking at. If it's balsa wood and just normal tin foil and things like that, he's going to notice that, and I don't think he's going to make any sort of BS story up about the foil.
I've just got this image now of that gentleman
crushing it all down, and
Brazile just sticking some foil and balsa wood together in the middle of one of his fields. It's like, I'm going to fool them all.
I'll get a new truck out of this.
And a meat packing plant.
Sorry.
That is bizarre. That
did you were saying it just came to me, that image. Sorry.
And you can see it, like Jamie said. I think it was before the stream started. In the photos where Jesse's holding the paper and aluminium tinfoil, you can see in
his body language
exactly like, is it you got me doing here? This isn't, what I picked up, or, what I saw. And it has to be. It has to be. And I think if it was to do another almost archaeological dig in the places, I think they'd find some more bits, definitely.
You might be right there. Yeah, there might, possibly. Although
people
you would have
still
thought
go and try to pick it clean now, though, don't they? People still wander around that area even today, looking at bits of debris. Yeah, apparently.
Yeah. But I was guessing
they go on little Roswell trip holidays and things, and they go searching.
do they do a bus tour or something where they take you out on a bus around like Roswell, and that's one of the stops on the. I don't know. Just it might be, and then you go foraging in the topsoil, don't you? For
you got the little shop for the trinkets, haven't they? The little alien and places like that. And so
yeah.
Dave, what do you think?
Well, I've got to be
listening to you now, mate.
I've been sort of like. Thanks for that. Steve. Oh no, I get it. I'm sort of like been thrown a bit of a curveball by listening to Damien and Steve. I've got to be honest. I can't believe that two people that I respect and love so much in the community can be completely hoodwashed by a complete total pile of trash as conjecture and verbatim story. No, I've of course it would be an act of love, a sort of char of kindness to photocopy and scan all these documents that I've got and put them up as a slideshow. But maybe one day, and they are out there if you want to go and get them to everybody. I will say this to anybody: is the research materials out there. Watching a few TV shows and forming an opinion isn't doing the research, And I've got copies of the affidavits of the people that were there. The actual testimonies of people that were there and others. And they believe it's true. They believe it's true. For me, I think, true or not, it's been an intrinsic part of creating a massive amount of interest in the UFO phenomenon that might not have otherwise been garnered had it not been for the possibility of actual extraterrestrial biological entities being found and the US government having them are taking them, and one surviving, so on. It's just more to the story. It's more to the romance of the story to keep it going within UFO law over the years. I mean,
EE1, wasn't it? I think was the supposed name, wasn't it, of the one that was
Absolutely,
recovered alive and ended up surviving supposedly for
out of the 3
decades.
Lived for many years afterwards.
Apparently.
And on top of that, you look at the various other things that have gone on throughout history. I mean, even the UK needed its own kind of UFO crash site for it to become prevalent throughout the UK. Because beyond that, you've really only got the Warminster flap, maybe, and maybe 1 or 2 others that created a little bit of a sparkle. It wasn't until like 1980. I mean, we'd done the Rendlesham Forest thing, but that sort of like kick-started interest in it. You've got the PC Alan Godfrey case in Todmorden and areas like that, but beyond that, not much interest sparking about. But a lot of what's been said and a lot of what does get said, is what somebody else has said. It's always about what somebody else has said.
That's true.
And when the explanation that the United States Air Force give has not helped at all. The explanations that have come from the government have not helped at all. They have continued to propagate the mystery surrounding Roswell rather than the actual facts of what went on. The facts of what went on are pretty much that Mac Brazile stumbled out into a field on what was supposed to have been just a normal working day and found a load of debris that he couldn't identify.
More than one debris is debris.
It is. It's the plural of debris that he couldn't explain. That he couldn't explain, and a strange smell that he couldn't explain. He reported it to the police, went into town to report it to the police. The newspapers, when Frank Joyce got hold of it, KGFL, and the military got hold of it, that the story took a complete different twist. It ties in with lots of other things that went on at the time as well, and we haven't gone into so much of it really. I think, Jamie, and I'm not trying to get out of giving you an answer here. I'm just being honest. There's so many. Damien's not wearing it. He's thinking, yes, you are trying to get out of giving an answer. That's why you're giving us
Whenever
this
anybody leads into a comment by saying that before they lead into the comment, and then contradict what they said.
Deniable plausibility.
Yeah,
it's like this long convoluted diatribe to get out of answering. Is that there's so many other points regarding the Roswell crash that are really integral to forming an opinion about it that we haven't discussed. That I think it would be selling it short. But no, I will give an opinion. I don't think it was a crashed alien saucer.
Dun, dun, dun.
Right, this is where I forgot to say something. I kind of agree with you there as well, Dave. Could it have been a test vehicle at that time as well? And then
that's different.
Just looking at what we know from today, from what happened on the day, and like you mentioned, Dave, a lot of these people they did sign affidavits. Interestingly, Marcel never did. But that was his son says because he died suddenly, and maybe that's why he didn't. Also, maybe he didn't want to write it down. I don't know. But lots of people did write affidavits about what they saw. They said they saw. All those affidavits really say, though, is that they saw debris in a field that was unusual, and that it didn't match what the government then later said. That's all we actually know from the bit we've talked about. Can we say it was an alien spacecraft? No, we can't, because and the bits about the bodies seem to be possibly added on. We're not 100% certain about that from just what we've seen here.
All we know for sure, you're right, is it's debris from an aerial vehicle of materials that
not
are
necessarily
not
an aerial vehicle, but
perhaps that's all you can state, isn't it? From the I suppose the witness testimony.
All we really know for certain, mate, is that there was debris on the ground. Like Dave said, that it stunk. That the animals didn't want to go anywhere near it. A couple of different witnesses have said that the animals did not want to go anywhere near this debris, and that when the military came in, they initially said it was a flying saucer, and then they very quickly changed their mind. Then they said it was a balloon. Then they said, "Oh no, sorry, we've made a mistake." It was a balloon, honest, but it was actually a top secret special balloon, and that's why we lied about it for so long.
I just want to make
it's like a child's answer, isn't it?
I just think it's worth commenting.
No, so it's a top secret special balloon.
it can't be forgotten about the time period that we're in when this has all gone on. What is going on socially and politically around the world? Okay, now it's like we do not trust the West. Is Russia, and you're going to hear, you don't trust those commie bastards. You're going to hear that from the West back towards the Soviets, because that's the way it was. Look at the Yalta Conference. Look at what was supposed to be going on at the end of the Second World War. Look at the deals that were going on. Look at what a lot of the high-ranking military officials in the United States actually thought about Russia, thought about the Soviets, and saw them as a huge threat. We're dealing with the start of the Cold War here. We're dealing with the development of munitions that will change the world forever. And that the arms race, the space race, the beginning of all that secrets or secretism, keeping hold of this technology. In the First World War, developing tractor vehicles. There was a machine gun company that actually developed them. That would the unit that would develop these things. And the best way of describing them to hide them from the Germans would be to call them water tanks. They then became tanks, these tractor vehicles, but it was secret. We didn't want the other side knowing about it. And we've been doing that for time immemorial. So, if you're going to get a civilian who's going to stumble across something that you want to keep secret from to all intents and purposes, the enemy, the Soviets, you're going to scatter about and try and come up with some way of describing it away as best as you possibly can. And if you don't see the flying saucer explanation as being a massive threat, at least at first hand, say it's that. If it covers up what it actually is, it's only when you've done backtracking, when you get like General Ramey who's gone, you don't want to be saying that's the last thing you want to be saying, actually. Yeah, you've gone a bit too far with that one. So you've got to look at the time period. You've got to look at the demographics, politically and socially. And the answers are there, I think, really.
That's the thing. I'm absolutely certain it was nothing to do with Mogul, and it was not a bloody balloon. Mm-hmm. But I actually think Roswell's a massive red herring, and I think it's a red herring that's been purposefully done. I do wonder though whether Marcel might have been, like I said, the intelligence officer, and he was basically told, right, something's gone down here, and it's we don't want anyone to know about this. I've got a brilliant idea. All those aliens that the people are talking about? Why don't we say it's one of them?
That's exactly where
it's a very good scapegoat, isn't it? It's a very good way of getting out, having to perhaps. But then, why would you then bother with the weather balloon story afterwards? Is that then? I suppose
General Ramey got back to General Ramey, and General Ramey went, "Are you a blithering idiot?
Yeah. That's what I think.
What's wrong with you, you moron?
Yeah,
we're the American government. People will remember this. Take it back." Something, you've gone too far. But
it's Charles Hart. It's William Hart, isn't it? Actually, I do beg your pardon. The press relations officer who made that release under the command of Colonel William Blanchard. He thought, there you go. We'll say it was a flying saucer. Yeah, that's a good idea. We'll roll with that. I'm not sure it was a good one. There's a couple of questions there, though, Jay. I don't know if you wanted. Oh no, what do I think it was? I think it was a test of some description that they wanted to keep from the Soviets, and because there was materials involved that they at first hand they didn't understand, I do think it was some kind of delivery system for either a weapon or for a spying device.
Remember, we're not too far from White Sands.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my God,
if a missile had, or something like that had hit the ground, if it had come in at a low trajectory, it could have sort of done this, sort of skipped and sort of.
I remember the video. Remember that video in the 1990s that surfaced. What people were claiming was the video footage of a crashed flying saucer, and you actually see it skip and bounce.
Oh yeah, the one that's in the desert as well, isn't it? But there's also
breaks up into loads of pieces
and electricity wires running along it as well.
One of the X1 crashes was like that, wasn't it? It's the start of the $6 Million Man. That one that it comes down and goes rolls. That sort of thing.
Do you think they could have done it? Obviously, because they were scared that Russia might have had their technology to build the atom bomb at the time.
I think it was more about the fact that it was absolutely ridden with spies. You had the internment of Japanese citizens, American Japanese citizens during the Second World War because the US was at war with Japan. There were plenty of Soviet. Russian nationals over there, just like there were Germans and so on and so forth. Very easy for information to get out, and especially if somebody is going to a radio station and a newspaper You're talking about international, or rather at least national coverage of it in some kind of way. I can sort of see why there's a knee-jerk reaction from the military to cover it up, because it would get back to the Russians. The Russians were sort of already in development, because at the end of it, obviously, you've got, a lot of it goes back to the Odessa files and other stuff like that. But with the breakup of Nazi Germany, you've got scientists fleeing over to the west, scientists fleeing over to the east. Obviously, the development of the V2 has led to rockets. So you're dropping away from the United States Air Force necessarily needing bombers to drop atomic munitions. They're already looking at using intercontinental ballistic missiles to deliver. So there's a lot going on.
A lot of technological advances. Just made the point there that says if it was a jet with pilots on board, they would have found it quicker. I would actually say I know from a fact that when they were doing white sand testing, they used to do missile tests, and then drivers in Jeeps, Willis Jeeps, would literally go out at 10-degree angles, and they would just go out because they had no clue where the missile went down most of the time. So they used to have to drive out in a fanning thing until they found it. It's completely possible for me that something a test could have gone wrong, and they'd have actually had no clue where it landed.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, MH370, we've still not found that.
But
planes go down all the time, and we don't find them. So in 1947, even more so. And not Halt, Bazza. Sorry, Jay, not Halt. Hart, as in Hotel Alpha Uniform Tango. HAUT.
There you go.
And also the alien bodies that were found as well could have been like the test dummies that they were using at the time as well. But I think
they did try to say that, brother. They said it was anthropomorphic crash test dummies was the way they found it. That's the UFO case close. Anthropomorphic.
Most people can tell the difference though between a crash test dummy and a living a previously living organism that is now dead.
Mate, you want to go out with you want to go out with some of the girls from Manchester, mate. You change that. Let me tell you.
Did you see those test dummies that actually tried to wrap in meat? It was a very brief experiment, but somebody came up with the idea that goes, well, if we're going to test like fires and burning and stuff like this, plastic doesn't really work very well. We want it to be as fleshy as possible. So they actually experimented using like meat crash test dummies. Until somebody
you want to go out with some of the girls from around Manchester, and you imagine
until the vegan activists kicked off, and then they weren't allowed to do that anymore.
It was when the scientists started throwing up and having nightmares and shit.
The vegan activists having anything to say, because for years Foley artists have used cabbages to hit them with axes to give the simulated sound of heads being thwacked with swords. Did you know that?
No,
that's what Foley artists do, yeah. And to simulate thunder, they will shake a tin full of rice or things like that, or a foil. Maybe it's the foil that they found at Roswell.
Rolf Harris and his wobble board. I don't think you're allowed to talk about that anymore, are you, Jamie?
You're not allowed to talk about Rolf Harris.
I used to
He was
be
in
in
prison up the road from us.
cartoon club.
Dirty bugger.
Oh,
do you know what it is yet? Yes, it's a paedophile. Stop drawing a penis, you weirdo. Kids TV.
Oh, brilliant. I loved Rolf Harris.
I bet you did. You look like the sort of person who would love Rolf Harris. Were you on Jim Fix It as well? Did he fix it for you, Steve?
Anyway.
Don't want to talk about that.
Rather not go into it, lads.
He fixed it
He
for
did.
me.
No, joking.
Couldn't sit down for a week.
Oh, he fixed him good and proper, yeah.
Still hurts.
How's about that then?
Yeah. The emotional scars are the deepest, aren't they? Emotional scars are the deepest.
Well, probably not in that case, but
So there you go, then, guys. We will have to revisit Roswell because, like Dave said, there's so much more to this story. A story that I haven't visited in a long time, so I've really enjoyed trying to get my teeth stuck into it. But oh my God, there's so much to it. And so many different stories to the same event.
There is. I've before Sunday when you announced what we was doing, I've been trying to upload a video of bloody hell, what's his name? Glenn Davis, that interview that he did in 1990. So I'm probably going to put that out tomorrow.
Okay.
How was that relevant?
Dave.
Apart from plugging your channel, how's that?
Well,
He's
no.
allowed to plug his channel. That's why we're here.
I'm joking. It's a joke.
Who's Glenn Davis? Sorry.
He's the mortician dude.
I think he's talking about Glenn Dennis.
Yes, he's talking about Glenn Dennis.
Yeah.
That'll do it.
So not only is he plugging his channel, he's doing it erroneously too.
Guess who's going to be doing some editing straight after this show?
Was it Control R, Control Replace, Davies, Dennis?
Bless you, Steve. Bless you, brother.
You've always got to make at least one mistake on every video, but or it's not a proper YouTube video.
Oh, I'm pretty sure.
That's mine.
I thought I may have done that with the word debris, but I did look it up, and it is French, and yeah, it's also.
Either way, mate, you know it's not pronounced debris.
I thought you would have picked up on that, Jay. That's why I said, "How was that relevant?" I thought Glenn Davis.
I got sitting there thinking about it. So that's not.
I couldn't think who Glenn Davis was. I was going.
That's why I said it. That's why
I was going to make a silly joke about Les Dennis earlier, and I didn't bother because I thought, half the people watching won't understand how I'm
one more
talking.
question. Do you
I've
want to
met
do
Les
that
Dennis.
one?
Okay. This is like obviously the rest of the story. The wreckage and all the body parts were apparently taken to Wright-Patterson eventually, weren't they?
Yeah.
Which Wright-Patterson is. Oh God, I was reading about that recently. It's a hell of a base, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
One of the largest military bases in the world.
Oh yeah. It's an interesting base as well, isn't it?
That's what, sorry.
That one on Holloman, yeah, the massive complexes.
Yeah, they're huge, aren't they?
On September the 11th, all of the 4 planes transponders all shut off over Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, didn't they? And their flight paths crossed as well. But that's another story. But it's just an interesting Air Force base in general, Wright-Patterson.
So they do a lot of their research and stuff still there, isn't it? A lot of the Air Force research facilities are at Wright-Patterson as well, I think. Yeah. I read quite a lot about it recently, but now I've actually want to talk about it. I can't actually remember. But I'm sure
welcome to my world.
Yeah,
that's what happens to me all the time. Every time we stream, in fact.
Yeah, but a lot of their research facilities in there. I think if they were moved there, they're not there now.
Oh, definitely not. You know, like because Area 51 wasn't publicly what was the word admitted, was it? Until what was it? I think the 90s before they publicly admitted the existence of it. If they did do a lot of Area 51, and now they publicly admitted its existence, I think they might have moved it off to another base that we don't know about. You know what I mean? I'm sure once something comes into the limelight, all the secret stuff gets shipped off somewhere else where they can keep it dark, doesn't it? Normally,
there's a reason why they buy places like Diego Garcia. And it's, I mean, one is so that they can bomb everywhere. You know, literally the official reason why the Americans wanted their bombing command there was because there was parts of India they couldn't bomb using other means. And I'm like, if I was India, I'd be like, what? You're purposefully buying an island or renting an island off the British so you can bomb us. We're your friends. But that's actually one of the official reasons. Just in case. There's a reason why they build places like Diego Garcia. Diego Garcia is an atoll. It's a tiny little island with that sticks out of the water. And they've built nearly 5 miles worth of underground tunnels there.
Well, look at what they've done with everything else around, the Philippine Sea and places like that. Especially when it comes to testing for things like anthrax. And various other goodies, and doing the nuclear testings on the old battleships from the Second World War when it come to the 1950s and 1960s. Well, in retaliation to the Russians developing the Tsar bomber and stuff like that. And then, don't worry about the radiation to all you lovely inhabitants. And they're going, but Mr. American, why are you all moving away? Why are they all moving away? If everything's safe, why are you deserting your bases? It's like, just stay there and here's some more Hershey's candy bars, Yeah.
It's a mirror and it's a mirror and a comb. Goodbye.
Yeah.
There's lots of places. It's amazing how many places around the world you're not allowed to go to as well. I mean, there's vast areas off the west coast of America that you're not allowed to fly over. You're not allowed to go near. They'll say it's like a missile testing range or something like that. But then these places are the size of they're 1,000 mile wide and 2,000. And no one's allowed in it. No one's allowed anywhere near them. There's places all over the world like that the Americans control. What is it? 800 bases around the world.
Wow. Yeah.
More than 1,000, I think.
It was over 1,000, yeah. Good God.
So there you go. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Well, at the time of Rendlesham, it was over 1,000.
Well, the Americans have made us give our empire back so that they could build military bases all over everywhere.
This is it. We didn't really give the empire back, did we? We just, on the front of it, we gave everybody their countries back, but then America just went and installed military bases there instead. So if they ever want to take over those countries again, we just do it through the Anglo-American Empire rather than just the British Empire. It's quite clever, really.
Like the question that I'm put there is, like Jay said, what he thought, and sort of Damo sort of alluded to what he thought too. My thoughts on where the wreckage and bodies are, sort of covered it before. Don't think there were,
You're not so sure there were bodies.
Yeah, I don't think it was the flying saucer.
Yeah,
there was the wreckage, but not bodies.
Any remains for me. Any remains like that. If it was extraterrestrial, then them remains should be somewhere like, I don't know, the Smithsonian Institute, really, shouldn't they? For interest or something like that. We know that's never going to happen. That is never ever going to. It's just not. Get over it, people. It's never going to happen. They're going to be safely ensconced away somewhere. I don't know. You know what, Mark? I think they're more likely to be behind the back of my fridge, because that's where everything else ends up when it gets lost.
Dave. There'll be an underground military base somewhere to Dave if they do exist somewhere.
Yeah, they're not going to be at Area 51 or
tens of levels deep, probably. Do you know what I mean? You need a super cosmic clearance access card to get down to that level, even.
Yeah, man.
It'll be like in Mulder.
Independence. X-Files.
It'll be like in that. They'll be hidden in some bunkers.
If I had a like really top secret stuff, I wouldn't call it super cosmic clearance, because if somebody ever found that, they'd be like, oh, that sounds interesting. I'd call it grey born as shit clearance or something like that. Something if somebody picks it up, I go, oh, that's too boring to even consider. And really, it's like and the doors open, there's UFOs and everything in there.
Yeah, there you go. Or warehouse for instruction manuals for video recorders, because no man's ever read one of them. Nobody's ever shown any interest in that. Nobody reads instructions. They'll get well left. Nobody's going anywhere near it.
Yeah.
Call it Warehouse 13.
Yeah,
that's what it is. A card for Warehouse 13. That was a good show. I hated that.
It was.
Cool. Enjoyed that show. All right, then, guys. Well, Dave, do you have any idea what you're planning to discuss next week?
Yes, I've got a couple of ideas. I've sort of like been, when I say approached, I mean, not physically, because that would be kind of weird, but I've been approached for a couple of ideas. I'll sort of like bat it out into the side chat. Indeed, amongst you fellas up here on the panel with me, one of them is the revelations and quatrains of Nostradamus.
Oh, good. So, that's something I've not looked into since I was a kid. So,
maybe Nostradamus. I haven't completely made my mind up about that one.
Was it predictor of the future, premonitions, or just a volume guesser?
Well,
no, some of this will stick. Come on.
Exactly.
Yeah, throw enough
things. Or you're making enough predictions. Eventually, you'll get one right.
Well, that's what they say, don't they? Monkeys, typewriters. Eventually, you'll end up with a Shakespearean sonnet. So maybe that.
That's a fascinating one. Yeah.
Maybe that one. I think maybe that one. If I change your mind about it, I've got something else on the back burner. Again, this is a little bit ufology-ish, and I don't want to do too much of that because Steve gets all cocky. I want to do something that keeps him on his toes a little bit. But maybe the Kumberger's UFO footage and sighting in Turkey, which became relatively famous among ufologists. Find that very, very interesting. So either that one or Nostradamus. I've got another. No, sorry, one of them two. Because I've got another one as well. But one of them two.
Hey, we're going to be doing this for a little while yet, mate. So I'm sure we'll get around to all of them eventually.
Cool.
And we will come back to Roswell at some point.
I think we should. Yeah.
No, I think we need to do the second episode as to what happened in the after events of where we've left it today. I don't think we can quite leave it.
Some of it gets really interesting, like as we were saying about the nurse and all these sort of myths and things that have come.
Oh, Glenn Davis.
Yeah, and Les Dennis.
Who's that?
Les Dennis. I'm joking, bro. Love you, really.
So, thank you, guys. I'm going to go and crawl into a hole and die. 'cause I've not been very well for the last few days, and this has required all of my energy just to sit here for 2 hours.
And quite amount of a fair amount of sphincter control as well. To be fair,
a little bit.
Oh, lovely.
No, I just haven't eaten for like 12 hours in preparation for this.
Oh, okay.
So your anus muscle must be, your
Nothing
anus
come out.
muscle must be like one of Schwarzenegger's pecs going off the
My arse is so tightly clenched at all times. There's
everybody gives some kind of like appreciation for Jace pucker string in the side chat there, because it'll have been twitching like a rabbit's nose. He's been waiting to get away all night. Bless him.
Fantastic.
It's the pain that goes with it. That's the fun bit. But anyway,
I apologise about my internet as well.
And so
Don't worry, Steve. You can't help it.
everyone should just be glad that we haven't got smelly internet at the moment, because I apologise about everything I think
it's good that even though you've been ill, you've been up here and you've done your bit. So cheers for hosting it, Jay. You know, if you're not well, it's always it's a show of love and appreciation to the people who come into the side chat as well as the panel. So I will thank you personally for that one. Shitty ass.
You're very well shitty ass. I went up. This is our first show on here for like a month, so there's no way we was cancelling it. I mean, I'd have basically crapped myself and just sat here.
No, you done well. It's appreciated that you know, even though you're sick, you've done. All joking aside, you know, you've still done it even though you're not well. So, cheers for that.
Appreciate it. All good. And like I said, it was a fascinating story. Really enjoyed it today, and so did Em. There you go. So right, thanks guys. We will see you next week on Dave's channel, where we'll be talking about Nostradamus or UFOs or something else, or
sorry about
if it's Nostradamus, let's decide soon, because that's a lot of reading that I've got to do.
Nostradamus.
Okay, Nostradamus it is.
Bosh. I've got all week then to think about it. Excellent. All right then, guys, thank you very much, and we will see you next week.
Yes. Thanks
Cheers,
all.
guys.
See you next week.
Take care.
Bye. Crazy kids.